When we talk about video games, more often than not, the terms we use to describe a game relate more to the gameplay than the subject of the game itself. The Witcher 3 is a third-person action RPG, which is a totally adequate summation of its mechanical parts, but does nothing to describe the game from an aesthetic or thematic standpoint. It's easy to argue that gameplay is king, so naturally the language we use to describe games would reflect how integral it is. But it also means that every once in a while a game is diminished by the way we categorize it. For example, The Witcher 3 is far more than just any old action RPG. It uses that framework to tell a dark and dreadful story about existentialism, destiny, and love. But even the main story betrays the depth of the world that Geralt the Witcher inhabits. There is humor, irony, and drama.
Listen here, lardass. You're gonna be satisfied with what you get, or I'll feed you to the ravens.
When I sat down to play, I fully expected all of these, but what I never anticipated was the horror that The Witcher 3 would make me feel. I would never describe The Witcher 3 as a horror game, but only because the term has become a catch-all phrase for games that try to elicit climatic scares out of you. While I never once yelped out of fear while playing, that doesn't mean that The Witcher didn't fill me with a dread that existed long after the game was turned off. In fact, given the choice, I would absolutely choose the horror of the Witcher universe over the horror that many games and movies try to trumpet. The truth is, the horror embodied by many recent games is so orchestrated that, despite being effective, it feels like the cotton candy of art. It tastes delicious, but wash it under any scrutiny and it dissolves entirely. The Witcher 3, on the other hand, isn't the type of game that aims to scare you, but fill you with the creeping sense of misery that is cultivated during your entire time in the game, heightening it as it continues to raise the stakes in the story. For starters, the world of The Witcher is entirely hostile. CD Projekt Red has successfully created one of the most gripping worlds I have ever played in an RPG. Of course, it isn't always hard to find ways to poke holes in that world, but I was a far more willing participant than in many other games I'd played. When the world is an illusion, its legitimacy is directly reflected by how careful we, as characters, are to protect it. RPGs have enjoyed a long history in gaming, yet more than ever I feel like developers are sacrificing the role in roleplay. RPGs have cross-pollinated just about every other genre of game, yet in doing so, there feels like a distinct diluting of the core element that made these games so popular to begin with: the imagination. When playing The Witcher 3, the illusion of the world before me is so interesting that I feel compelled to play the role of Geralt. I move through the world as Geralt would, sometimes riding my horse along at a slowed pace just so I can soak in the ambiance rather than fast traveling to every destination. The game reinforces this by offering a world rich in detail and game mechanics that aren't trying to interrupt your immersion at every possible moment. Dragon Age Inquisition, by comparison, felt like a game where the illusion was constantly being shattered because of how desperate BioWare were to showcase what they had built. Every chance they got, the game tried to show you something new. The way the menus looked and acted constantly served to remind you that you were just playing a game. Every notable moment in the game might as well have had a big sign over it saying, "Did you see that?" The Witcher 3 is not perfect. For one, Geralt moves like someone who just received a brain transplant and hasn't gotten used to his new body. But there were times where I was so absorbed by what I was doing that I felt inspired to do what I could to maintain the illusion. I walked instead of ran. I made decisions based on what I felt Geralt would do, not what rewards awaited me. I wanted to become a part of the world rather than subvert it. When I recalled how I played Dragon Age Inquisition, I realized I played the game in the exact opposite manner. I ran everywhere, I jumped on tables and over characters, whatever could get me from point A to B the fastest. I thought only of the rewards and rarely of the implications. I wasn't a cog in BioWare's machine, I was a living, breathing Deus Ex Machina, interjecting into the game world to exert my dominance over it. If my Inquisitor was at a formal ball, I cared little for maintaining any semblance of formality. I ran and jumped and acted in a way that, if it were real life, would certainly have drawn the ire of everyone around me. It's important to note The Witcher 3 is technically the same. I could jump on tables and kill characters wantonly, and the game would ultimately fail to compensate for my outlandish actions, thus wrecking the illusion. The point is, with The Witcher 3, I was so invested in the world I didn't want the game to break the fantasy we were mutually upholding, which of course made it all the more tragic when, for technical reasons or otherwise, the game failed to uphold its end of the transaction. So when I say that The Witcher 3 made me horrified, it's because the game made me sensitive and open to it, not because the developers contrived situations to appeal to my base instinct of fear. They made a world that made me care, and then when they stuck daggers into that world and twisted, I responded accordingly. Of all the sides of Geralt we have seen, mutant, monster hunter, murderer, being a father is easily his best. It paints the lens through which we view all of his actions in a shade that is far more resonant because Geralt does the things he does not for himself, but for his daughter. Geralt has always had a soft spot for others, but Ciri represents a tangible hook for audiences to hang their sympathies on, and Geralt's quest to save her becomes something that everyone can empathize with. There is a powerful tragedy in a story of someone fighting against the universe in order to save the one they love. It makes us ask tough questions like, how far will we go to protect those we care about? These are questions that, as members of a pretty enlightened society, we rarely have to ask, but just because we never feel the need to ask a question doesn't free it of having an answer. That is why I find The Witcher 3 so horrific. Geralt's quest to save his daughter is, in many ways, an exploration of the depths we can sink to protect the ones we love. Geralt's fatherhood has humanized him more than any aspect of the previous games ever could, yet his quest to preserve that fatherhood conversely threatens to make him a monster. Against the backdrop of a world at war, where Geralt and the common folk are nothing but pawns in a game of kings, how could you not be horrified?
I name thee, Daya, and embrace thee as my daughter.
Good. Now bury the body.